Black Hollow was a forgotten place. The village was nestled deep within a valley. Towering trees choked the sunlight. A perpetual mist clung to the ground, shrouding everything in an eerie silence. The air was heavy with the scent of decay and the unseen presence of something sinister. The village was small, a cluster of dilapidated houses with crumbling stone walls and vacant windows like empty eyes. The paths were overgrown with weeds, and the silence was broken only by the rustling of leaves and the occasional croak of a crow. The villagers were a somber lot, their faces etched with a deep-seated fear. They spoke little, and when they did, it was in hushed tones, as if afraid to attract unwanted attention. They knew the darkness that haunted their village. They whispered of the legend. Centuries ago, a witch named Morwen lived on the outskirts of Black Hollow. She was feared and ostracized by the villagers who accused her of practicing dark magic. When a sickness swept through the village, they blamed Morwen, claiming she had cursed them. A mob descended upon her hut, dragging her to the village square. They tied her to a stake, the flames of their torches dancing in her eyes. With her dying breath, Morwen cursed Black Hollow. She vowed to unleash a terror that would haunt them for eternity. From the ashes of her pyre, a creature of darkness was born, the Midnight Watcher. It was a collector of souls, feeding on the fear and despair that permeated Black Hollow. The villagers watched in horror as a shadowy figure rose from the flames. It vanished into the night, leaving behind the echo of Morwen's curse. Generations passed, and the legend of the Midnight Watcher became ingrained in the fabric of Black Hollow. It was more than just a story. It was a palpable presence that haunted their waking hours and tormented their dreams. The villagers whispered of a creature that emerged from the shadows at the stroke of midnight. They spoke of a chilling sound that heralded its arrival, the slow, deliberate creaking of wood, like the groan of an ancient coffin being opened. Those who heard the sound knew that the Watcher was near, its unseen eyes fixed upon them. Some dismissed it as superstition, but the fear was real. It lingered in the air like the perpetual mist. The stories were passed down through generations, each telling adding to the chilling lore of the Midnight Watcher. The creaking wood was the harbinger of doom. It started softly, a barely audible groan that sent shivers down the spine. Then it would grow louder, more insistent, as if something heavy was being dragged across the wooden floorboards. It was a sound that chilled the blood and made the bravest heart pound in their chest. Those who were unfortunate enough to hear the sound and dared to look outside their windows saw it. A tall, gaunt silhouette framed against the moonlit mist. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, piercing the darkness and instilling a primal fear in those who met its gaze. Paralyzed with terror, they could only watch as the Watcher approached, its long, bony fingers reaching out towards them. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it would vanish, leaving behind a chilling silence and the lingering scent of decay. No one knew what happened to those who encountered the Watcher. They were never seen again. Section 5. Eliza's Arrival. Eliza, a young woman with a thirst for adventure, arrived in Black Hollow on a dreary afternoon. She had purchased an old, dilapidated house on the outskirts of the village, drawn to its isolation and the air of mystery that surrounded it. The villagers warned her about the legend of the Midnight Watcher, but Eliza dismissed their stories as folklore. "Just old wives' tales," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "There's no such thing as monsters." The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. They knew better than to tempt fate. "You'll be careful, won't you, dear?" Mrs. Hawthorne, an elderly woman with kind eyes and a worried frown, had asked. "Legends exist for a reason." Eliza had just smiled and thanked her for her concern. She wasn't afraid, not yet. Section 6. Dismissing the legend. Eliza spent her days exploring the village and the surrounding woods, her camera in hand, capturing the haunting beauty of her surroundings. She found a strange allure in the decaying grandeur of Black Hollow. The villagers kept their distance, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and pity for the newcomer who dared to tempt fate. At night, Eliza would sit by the fireplace in her dimly lit living room, a book in hand, the silence broken only by the crackling of the fire. She would hear the whispers in the wind, the creaking of the old house, but she attributed them to the age of the structure and her overactive imagination. One evening, as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the village, Eliza decided to venture into the woods. She had heard whispers of an old cemetery hidden amongst the trees, a place the villagers avoided at all costs. Eliza, ever the skeptic, was intrigued. The night Eliza decided to explore the cemetery, a storm gathered on the horizon. The wind howled through the trees, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Undeterred, Eliza ventured into the woods, her flashlight cutting a narrow beam through the darkness. She found the cemetery just as the first clap of thunder shook the ground. It was a desolate place, overgrown with weeds, the headstones cracked and covered in moss. As Eliza wandered amongst the graves, she felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She could sense eyes watching her. As she turned to leave, she caught a flicker of movement in the periphery of her vision. A tall, shadowy figure stood at the edge of the cemetery, its outline illuminated by a flash of lightning. Eliza froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The figure remained motionless, its eyes fixed on her. Eliza's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the figure, her mind struggling to comprehend what her eyes were seeing. The lightning flashed again, and this time Eliza could have sworn she saw the glint of eyes, cold and malevolent, staring back at her. The sound of creaking wood, slow and deliberate, echoed through the cemetery. It was coming from the direction of the figure. It was a sound that sent shivers down Eliza's spine, a sound she had dismissed as nothing more than superstition. Terror, primal and consuming, washed over Eliza. Her legs felt like lead, her body rooted to the spot. The figure began to move towards her, gliding through the shadows with an unnatural grace. Eliza's scream died in her throat, choked by the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. Eliza watched in terror as the figure approached, its eyes burning into her soul. She tried to move, to run, but her body refused to obey. The creaking grew louder, each groan of the wood like a death knell. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. The cemetery was plunged into darkness once more, the only sound the howling wind and the pounding rain. Eliza stumbled back, her heart racing, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She fumbled for her flashlight, but it slipped from her grasp, falling into the mud with a dull thud. She was alone. Or was she? Eliza didn't wait to find out. She turned and ran, her mind screaming, her lungs burning. She didn't stop running until she reached the relative safety of her house, slamming the door shut behind her and bolting it. Eliza was never the same after that night. The terror had shaken her to her core. She tried to leave Black Hollow, to put as much distance between herself and the cursed village as possible, but something always drew her back. One day, Eliza vanished without a trace. Her house was found empty, the door wide open, as if she had left in a hurry. Some whispered that she had gone mad, driven to the brink by her encounter with the Midnight Watcher. Others believed that the Watcher had claimed her, adding her soul to its collection. The truth remained a mystery, lost to the shadows that clung to Black Hollow. The legend of the Midnight Watcher lived on, a chilling reminder that some legends are more than just stories, they are warnings. And in the village of Black Hollow, the creaking wood could be heard every night, a harbinger of doom for those unfortunate enough to be marked by the Watcher.